All right, so we're going to do our lecture right now on 3-3, and just as I just told you, these notes are going to go first on page 50 up till we talk about the water cycle, and then we're going to talk about the cycling of carbon and nitrogen, or nitrogen specifically, and nutrient limitation on page 52. So if you have your notes already done, great, and if you don't, you're going to take notes. Remember, I've tried to go through this PowerPoint, and I think I've already posted it on Google Classroom, but I'll post it again today. You're going to focus on the things that are in bold, important vocabulary terms, and things that are highlighted. Okay, so I will make sure that I put this updated table of contents on Google Classroom, and we will be adding some items to go on those left-hand pages. So pages 49 and 51, you're going to know what you're going to put on those pages as well. Okay? So there's going to be some areas where we stop and answer some questions, and you're going to put those on your left-hand pages. So here we go. I'm going to open up the PowerPoint now. And I'm going to change really quickly our, here we go. Yes, our notes are corrected there. So there's your title. Let's get started. So as we talked about, we've been talking about how energy flows and cycles through ecosystems. Now we're looking at, instead of energy cycling, we're going to be looking at how matter cycles. And matter cycles differently than energy does. Can somebody remind us, how does energy flow through an ecosystem? Does it go around and around in an ecosystem? No, you're saying no. So tell me, how does energy cycle in an ecosystem? How does it flow in an ecosystem? Okay, so the energy flows through different organisms, and is that energy flow through organisms 100% efficient? No. How efficient is it approximately? Only about 10% efficient. So remember when we did our wall walk? There was a question, and there was a picture of that boy band. I think it was like over to by the door, and it said, how does energy flow through an ecosystem? And it referred to that boy band. What was the name of that boy band? One Direction. And so energy flows through ecosystems in, let me hear it. One direction. One direction. And it's not being recycled. It's flowing in one direction, and it gets lost every step of the way. How does energy get lost each step of the way in an ecosystem? Through heat release. And it gets left in materials that are undigested, and that's why we only have 10% moving from one level to another. So energy flows in one direction. How does matter flow? Well, we're going to be talking about cycles. What does a cycle mean? What does a cycle mean? It means it goes around and around and around. It cycles. So, is matter lost? No, it's not. It's constantly being put into one molecule or another, constantly being cycled through ecosystems. Okay? So again, our notes are going to go on pages 50 and 52, and we're going to be looking at how water, carbon, and nitrogen and oxygen cycle between the abiotic parts of an ecosystem and the biotic parts. You know that abiotic means what? What does abiotic mean? Non-living. So we're going to be looking at how matter cycles between the non-living parts of an ecosystem and the living parts of an ecosystem. What kind of things are non-living parts of an ecosystem? The rocks. And rocks break down and create soil. And the water. And the water vapor in the air, the humidity, and the sunlight, and all that. So how does matter cycle through those non-living components in an ecosystem and then into the animals? And then we'll return again to look at photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and those two processes and how they are involved in the flow of matter. So, how does matter move among the living and the non-living parts of an ecosystem? This is our overarching essential question. This is the big question. How does matter move among living and non-living parts in an ecosystem? So this would be the first thing for sure that you would want to write down. Resume. So recycling, you have to think of the earth as the ultimate recycling machine. And we just already talked about how energy and matter move differently. So unlike energy's one-way flow, matter is constantly being recycled within and between ecosystems, within the non-living and the living parts of the ecosystem. So matter flows, cycles, energy flows. Okay, matter cycles, energy flows. Do you have that in your notes? If you already took notes, make sure you underline that, okay? Matter cycles, energy flows. So like a river that flows away, energy flows away, and it gets lost as heat. So the organic molecules, the elements, not just organic, but as well as inorganic, are getting passed from one organism to another. And so that's why we call it a biogeochemical cycle. Because what does bio mean? Life. Geo refers to the earth. And chemical refers to chemicals. So these chemicals are being cycled between living things and the earth, and back and forth. So matter never gets used up. Okay, it never gets used up. It just gets transformed. And so things like, for example, our equation for photosynthesis. Do you remember our equation for photosynthesis? 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O. You can't forget it because it's going to be on your final exam. Our final exam covers the whole semester. So that's why I keep bringing up things from the past so it jars your memory. Yields, what's made through the process of, we're talking about photosynthesis. What's produced through the process of photosynthesis? 6. 6H. Oh my Lord. Plants make what for us that we like a lot? Okay, glucose and oxygen. So do they make 6 glucoses or 6 oxygens? 6 oxygens plus C6H12O6. There's our glucose. Now, where did the carbons come from to make the glucose molecules? From the carbon dioxide in the air. So this equation is showing us how one piece of the puzzle of how carbon is cycled through between non-living and living parts of ecosystems. The carbon dioxide, is that a living thing? No, it's not alive. It's an inorganic molecule. Where do we find the carbon dioxide that a plant uses? In the atmosphere. Is the atmosphere a biotic part of an ecosystem or an abiotic part? Abiotic. It's a non-living part of an ecosystem. So here we have the cycling of carbon from a non-living, inorganic part of an ecosystem into a living part of an ecosystem. And then guess what? When you eat a plant and you ingest the glucose, you're getting those carbon atoms that used to be in the atmosphere. So you are part of this biogeochemical cycling. And when you break down the glucose in your mitochondria and do cellular respiration, what gas do we exhale?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide. Guess where those carbons came from?
The plants.
The ones that the plants had taken out of the atmosphere. So do you see that we are a part of these cycles? All right. I forget sometimes it's first period. You guys just kind of stare at me with that blank face, but there is some level of understanding. Yeah? Okay. I get some nods and some smiles and some eye contact, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that. You guys, I know you're really subdued because I'm recording. It's okay to have a little bit of personality, though. But it's Wednesday. It's Wednesday, yes. So, elements and chemical compounds and other forms of matter are passed from one organism to another. Matter is cycled, it's transformed, it's assembled into living tissues, and then released from the body as waste products. Just what we were talking about. We take in the glucose that the plant was using to build its tissues. We take in those glucose molecules, we use those carbons, and some of them end up eventually leaving our body as a waste gas, which is carbon dioxide. So, the water cycle. They say there's something of the rule of threes. That a human can live 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 weeks without food. Some of us could go a little bit longer. Okay? And 3 days without water. Okay? All living things need water to survive. Because water, yes, 3 days without water. 3 minutes, you'd probably pass out. After about 6 minutes, they say you do irreparable brain damage.
And 9 minutes you did?
No. After about 6 minutes, you're probably if they were able to revive you, you would have serious brain damage. Okay? So that's why when you find someone who's not breathing, it's very important that you figure out if their heart's beating and if they're, before you do CPR. Because, even if their heart's beating, they're cycling oxygenated blood around, and you need to help them with their breathing. You don't have to do chest compressions. Figure out if they're choking or why they're not breathing. All right, so water is moving between the ocean, the atmosphere, and the land. So over here, I have a model to show you to help you understand the water cycle and just how important water is to us. So this is a 1,000 milliliter graduated cylinder. And I colored it blue because we think of water as being blue, right? Okay. So I'm going to pause the recording while we talk about this. And we'll talk about how much water we have on our planet and how much is really available to us. Because I think this is pretty amazing. So, all right. So as I showed you, where is all of our water locked up in that demonstration? In the oceans. And so remember that one big container represents the oceans. And that is one of the places, now remember cycles don't have beginnings and ends. So we're going to if we start arbitrarily at the ocean, okay, because that's where most of our water is locked up. How does ocean water make its way into the atmosphere? How does ocean water make its way into the atmosphere? Evaporation. So hopefully in kindergarten you learned, my kids learned the water cycle in kindergarten, where they talked about, evaporation, and they made their little hand gesture up, and then condensation to be the clouds, and then precipitation, little wavy hands, right? And so those are the three parts that you probably are most familiar with on the water cycle, okay? Evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. And precipitation is going to be rain, sleet, snow, all of those things, right? Okay? Go up just a couple miles up Mount Baldy and you can have snow. Okay. The things that you're probably not as familiar with, okay? So you probably understand evaporation, condensation, precipitation. How about runoff? Runoff is yes, when the snow melts and it starts to run down the valleys and create rivers. Anytime you have runoff. And seepage, when the water soaks into the soil, and we showed that in our little demo where we looked at how much water is held in the soil. Root uptake, what do you think that means? The roots are taking in water, and where's that water going? Into the plants. Okay, it's going into the plants, and why would the plants need I just said it. The plants need that water to do photosynthesis, right? Now, Transpiration is probably the one that you don't know. Okay? Transpiration is almost like evaporation through a plant. On a humid day, have you ever been standing underneath a plant and all of a sudden you get drops of water on you? And you're standing underneath a tree, right? Okay, that's not, it's not rain, it's not a bird peeing on you, right? It's water actually dripping off of the leaves of plants. So when water evaporates from a leaf, that's transpiration. And hopefully you remember when we did photosynthesis, we looked at the layers of a leaf, and there are the spongy layer with all the holes, and then those little guard cells and the stomata, the openings on the bottom side of the leaf. That's where the water transpires from. So, what do we call the water that's in the atmosphere? The water that's in the atmosphere is called vapor. Okay? The water that is in the atmosphere. So water evaporates from the surface of the ocean and becomes vapor. If you have more vapor in the air, if you have more water in the air, then we call that humidity. The percentage of humidity is the amount of water vapor that's in the air. What? At times of the year, it's very humid in New York because they have a lot of plants around that are and their proximity to water, and so that creates water vapor. Also, in the summertime, the temperatures get warmer, and warm air holds more water vapor than cold air. So, where in the United States would you expect it to be more humid?
Florida.
Texas, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, because those states are all in the south. And the farther south you go towards the equator, the warmer it gets.
Like Panama.
So Panama, which is way down towards the equator, right? I think it's right even on the equator, runs right through it. Panama is very humid. And those are where we have our tropical biome people. What do you have along the equator? Tropical rainforests.
Well, that's where all those animals are.
Lots of animals and lots of plants. We have other animals other places though, right?
Like monkeys.
Okay. So, the first process that you need to be familiar with, and I'm sure you remember what it is, evaporation. When water vapor goes from a liquid to a gas, that's evaporation. But it can also move from the leaves of trees into the atmosphere, and that's transpiration. So I want to make sure that you understand that there are two ways that water gets into the atmosphere: evaporation and transpiration. Do you have both of those terms in your notes? Evaporation and transpiration. Okay. So to make water into a vapor, and transpire means it's a process of moving across. And so the water moves from the leaf, across the leaf into the atmosphere. So that's transpiration. Evaporation and transpiration. And again, you guys, if I'm going too fast for you, you're going to have this to look at tonight. I'll post the lecture. Then, if the water vapor gets cold enough, it condenses to form clouds. And if the condenses and continues enough, then it's going to actually become heavier than it can stay in the atmosphere as a cloud, and it's going to fall to the earth as precipitation. When it accumulates on the earth, then we have runoff. You guys are probably, of all the biogeochemical cycles, the most familiar with the water cycle, yes? And so we have runoff across the surface of the earth. So I want to make sure that you know all of the parts of the biogeochemical cycle. And so this is another kind of graphic to show you just how little of the water on our planet is actually available to us. Okay? 3/4 of the earth is covered in water. And it's mostly, as we saw, what kind of water? Ocean water. So 97% of that, 97, 98% of that is in the ocean. So only 2.5% is fresh water. But of that 2.5%, 70% of it is ice. 30% is in the ground and such. And only 1% is even involved in anything that humans might be able to access. And 0.08%, okay, 0.08% of what is on our planet is actually available for us to use. Here's another graphic in another way just showing that what this means is of all the fresh water on the earth, there it is, okay, if you take all that fresh water and break it down, most of it's in glaciers and ice caps, a little bit in groundwater, and then we have a little bit in surface water. If you look at the surface water that's available, ice and snow, lakes, and so really biological water is this little line in between the green and the brown up there. So very, very little water is actually available to us. That's what we have to do a good job. And I really wish that one of you would go into engineering and environmental studies and come up with a really good way that in Southern California we could capture the rainwater effectively and use it effectively instead of watching it run and accumulate in the streets and go down the gutters. I mean, we should all have 55-gallon barrels where we accumulate the rainwater from our rooftops every time it rains and use it. In Southern California, all houses should be built with that kind of water, reclamation system. But it costs money. And the money that builders would need in order to put those systems on the houses would then be passed on to homeowners. And if you're trying to sell a house that costs more than another house that's equally as nice, then people are going to buy the cheaper house, right? I don't know, you guys. Hydrology, the study of how we move water around. Big, big, big career opportunities here in California for hydrologists. So, all right. Here's a little assignment that I want you to do. And it's not going to go onto page 65. It's going to go onto our left-hand page, which is 49. Okay, so this is your DLC, E. You're going to draw a diagram of the water cycle. Okay, so this is your DLCE. And then you're going to answer these questions, 1 through 5. Okay, so don't do it right now. I want to see what our next slide is just so that we, I think we're going to be stopping at this point, but I just want to verify, so give me a sec. Yeah, so right now, this is where I'm going to stop this lecture for today, and then tomorrow we'll do the rest of the Cornell notes. So what I'd like you to do for homework tonight is 2 things. I'd like you to start working on this DLCE, and you get class time to work on this. And then I want you to copy down the important parts of the rest of the PowerPoint so we can get through it relatively quickly tomorrow. Okay? All right.